Before I dive into the main story, I need to lay out some important background information. I'm 45M, a tenured professor at a respectable university outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My academic career had always been the cornerstone of my life, and I thought I had everything figured out: a stable career, a loving family, and a fiancé who I believed was my perfect match. Growing up, my family appeared to be the typical Midwestern nuclear family. My father, 75M, worked as an engineering manager, my mother, 72F, managed the household with unwavering discipline, and we three siblings, me, my brother, 43M, and my sister, 38F, were raised with traditional values and high expectations. My brother had always been the charismatic one, the type who could charm his way through any situation. He went into business and became quite successful, at least on the surface. There was always this unspoken competition between us, though he'd never admit it. Our sister often played mediator, trying to keep the peace whenever our competitive streaks clashed. Despite the rivalry, we maintained what I thought was a strong family bond. Sunday dinners were mandatory, and my parents took pride in keeping everyone together. My mother, especially, was adamant about maintaining the image of a perfect family, even when things weren't quite so perfect beneath the surface. 5 years ago, everything in my life shifted when Emma, 35F, joined my research lab as a Ph.D. candidate. She was a career changer, coming from the corporate world with fresh perspectives and ambitious goals. Her intelligence and drive were immediately apparent, and our shared passion for research naturally drew us closer. Over time, our professional relationship evolved into something more personal. We started sharing coffee breaks, discussing topics beyond our research, and eventually, our conversations extended beyond the lab. Emma had this way of making complex theories seem simple, and her enthusiasm for learning was contagious. She brought a new energy to my somewhat routine academic life. 2 years into her Ph.D. program, we began dating. I was cautious at first, well aware of the potential complications of dating a student, even though she wasn't directly under my supervision anymore. We kept things professional at work and followed all university protocols regarding relationships between faculty and students. My family welcomed Emma warmly, especially my mother, who had been not so subtly hinting that it was time for me to settle down. Emma fit in perfectly at our family gatherings, engaging my father in conversations about engineering, helping my mother with her charity events, and even becoming something of a confidant to my sister. My brother, however, showed an unusual interest in getting to know Emma better. At the time, I attributed it to his natural friendliness and Emma's engaging personality. Looking back, I should have noticed the lingering glances and the way their conversations would stop abruptly when I entered the room. Last year, I proposed to Emma during a quiet evening at home after she successfully defended her dissertation. It wasn't a grand gesture, just us, a bottle of wine, and the ring I'd carefully chosen. She said yes, immediately, and we started planning our life together. We talked about combining our research interests, maybe starting a family, and building a future that seemed perfect in every way. That's the background you need to understand what happened next. I know it might seem like I'm providing too much detail, but trust me, every bit of this context matters for what I'm about to share. Let me know if you'd like me to continue with how everything fell apart. The months following our engagement were filled with what I now recognize as warning signs. Emma started spending more time at the lab during odd hours, claiming she was working on a new research project. My brother began showing up at university events where he had no real reason to be. At the time, I dismissed these changes as stress from wedding planning and my brother's usual social butterfly behavior. Academic life continued as usual. I had my classes to teach, graduate students to mentor, and research papers to review. Emma and I had settled into a comfortable routine, dividing our time between the lab, my house in the suburbs, and family obligations. We were planning to move in together after the wedding, which was set for next summer. My mother threw herself into wedding preparations with unprecedented enthusiasm. She constantly invited Emma over for lunch to discuss flowers, venues, and guest lists. My father would joke about finally getting grandchildren, and my sister helped Emma look for the perfect dress. From the outside, everything appeared to be moving in the right direction. The lab became our shared space, a place where we could be both colleagues and partners. Emma had her own office adjacent to mine, a perk of her new postdoctoral position. We were careful to maintain professional boundaries at work, but everyone knew about our engagement. Our colleagues seemed genuinely happy for us, often commenting on how well we complemented each other. Looking back, I should have noticed how my brother's visits to campus became more frequent. He would drop by unannounced, claiming he was in the area for business meetings. Sometimes he would bring coffee for everyone in the lab, but his conversations with Emma seemed to grow longer each time. I trusted both of them completely, my brother and my future wife. That trust would prove to be my biggest mistake. The changes in Emma were subtle at first. She started taking more personal calls outside the office, keeping her phone face down on her desk, and being vague about her evening plans. When I asked about these changes, she would smile and say she was just stressed about post-wedding career planning. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Our family dinners became somewhat tense, though I couldn't pinpoint why. My brother would often arrive late or leave early, and Emma would find excuses to skip some of them altogether. My sister seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact during conversations about the wedding. At the time, I attributed all of this to pre-wedding jitters and busy schedules. My parents remained outwardly supportive, but there was an underlying tension I couldn't quite understand. My mother's enthusiasm for wedding planning started to feel forced, and my father became unusually quiet during family gatherings. In retrospect, perhaps they sensed something was wrong but didn't know how to address it. That's where things stood 3 months ago, just before everything imploded. I had no idea that my carefully constructed academic and personal life was about to shatter, or that the people I trusted most would be the ones holding the hammer. I'll continue with what happened next, but I need a moment to collect my thoughts. Even now, months later, the memories of what I discovered in my lab that day make my stomach churn. I never expected my life to fall apart on a regular Tuesday afternoon. I had a light teaching schedule that day and decided to head back to the lab earlier than usual. The hallways were quiet, typical for a late afternoon in the academic building. I heard muffled laughter coming from Emma's office before I even reached our lab space. At first, I thought nothing of it. Emma often had colleagues or students stop by for consultations. But something felt off: the tone of the laughter, the hushed quality of it. When I swiped my card and entered the lab, I noticed my brother's expensive leather briefcase sitting on one of the lab benches. The sound of hurried movement came from Emma's office. My hand hesitated on the door handle for just a moment. In that brief pause, I think some part of me already knew what I would find, but my conscious mind refused to accept it. When I opened the door, the scene before me burned itself into my memory. Emma and my brother, tangled together on her office couch. She was wearing the university sweatshirt I had given her last Christmas. My brother's tie was loose, his shirt partially unbuttoned. They froze like deer in headlights, their faces a mix of shock and guilt. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the gentle hum of Emma's computer and the ticking of the wall clock, a clock I had helped her hang when she first moved into this office. "It's not what it looks like," my brother finally broke the silence with perhaps the most cliché line possible. His voice had that same smooth, persuasive tone he'd used since childhood to talk his way out of trouble. But this wasn't a broken window or a borrowed car. This was my life. Emma didn't even try to speak. She just pulled my sweatshirt tighter around herself, as if somehow that would make the situation less horrible. Her research papers were scattered across her desk, including drafts of the paper we were supposed to present together at next month's conference. I surprised myself with how calm I remained. "Both of you need to leave. Now." My voice was steady, clinical almost. Years of maintaining composure during challenging academic presentations had apparently prepared me for this moment. My brother started to say something about how these things just happen, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't. Just don't." I turned to Emma. "I expect your resignation from the lab on my desk by tomorrow morning." Then I walked out, leaving them to deal with their disheveled clothes and shattered alibis. I drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets of Milwaukee. By the time I parked in my driveway, my phone was already buzzing with missed calls and messages. I ignored them all. The following days revealed just how deep the betrayal went. My mother's first reaction was shock and anger, but that quickly transformed into something else entirely. "We need to think about this rationally," she said during an unexpected visit to my house. "They made a mistake, but they're both young." My father's response was even more bewildering. "These things happen in families sometimes," he said with a shrug, as if we were discussing a minor disagreement over holiday plans rather than a fundamental breach of trust. My sister tried to remain neutral, but her attempts at diplomacy only made things worse. "I'm not taking sides," she would say, which felt like taking a side in itself. Later, I discovered she had known about their relationship for weeks but had chosen to stay silent to avoid causing drama. The real shock came when my mother started suggesting that I should consider forgiveness. "Emma is already part of the family," she argued, "and Marcus has always been a bit impulsive." She spoke about them as if they were teenagers who had stayed out past curfew, not adults who had deliberately destroyed my trust. When I heard that my brother had started regularly attending Sunday family dinners, I had stopped going to something in me snapped. The same day, I received an email from the university in Indianapolis, following up on a position they had mentioned months ago. They were looking for someone to lead their department's research division. I replied to the email immediately, expressing my interest. The timing couldn't have been better. My department chair had been understanding about the situation with Emma, but I could feel the uncomfortable glances and whispered conversations whenever I walked through the halls. My decision to leave was met with a mix of reactions. My mother acted as if I was abandoning the family. My father made some vague comments about running away from problems. My sister tried to convince me to at least wait until things calmed down. But I had made up my mind. The contract with Indianapolis was signed within weeks. I found an apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far from the academic district. The physical distance felt necessary not just from my family, but from everything that reminded me of my old life. As I packed up my office, I found little reminders of Emma everywhere, her notes in the margins of shared research papers, the coffee mug she had forgotten on my desk, even a hair tie she used to keep on my coat rack. Each item went into the trash, along with the carefully laid plans we had made together. The day I left Milwaukee, none of my family came to say goodbye. My mother had called the night before, making one last attempt to convince me to stay. "Family should stick together," she said. I responded that family should also stick up for each other, but she didn't seem to understand the point. I'm writing this from my new office in Indianapolis. The view is different, the coffee shop across the street makes terrible espresso, and I'm surrounded by boxes that still need unpacking. But for the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe. There's more to tell about what happened after I moved, about my family's attempts to fix things, about the changes in my life, and about how I finally found happiness again. But that will have to wait for another update. Right now, I need to focus on building my new life, one day at a time. Update 1, it's been 6 months since I moved to Indianapolis, and I finally feel ready to share what's happened. Setting up a new life at 45 isn't easy, but sometimes it's necessary. The campus here is different, more spread out, less of the Gothic architecture I was used to in Milwaukee. My new office overlooks a modern courtyard instead of the old oak trees I'd grown accustomed to, but maybe that's fitting for this fresh start. The first few weeks were a blur of administrative meetings and lab setup. My new department has been surprisingly welcoming, though I can tell they're curious about why someone would leave a tenured position mid-semester. I've kept my explanation professional, seeking new research opportunities, and most colleagues have respected my privacy. I threw myself into work, spending long hours setting up my new research lab and reviewing graduate student applications. It was easier than dealing with the constant stream of messages from my family. My mother seemed to have made it her mission to fix things, calling almost daily with various attempts at reconciliation. "They're both deeply sorry," she'd say, as if that somehow made it all okay. I started letting her calls go to voicemail. My father's occasional texts were equally frustrating, brief messages suggesting I was being too harsh about the whole situation. My sister's attempts at staying neutral became increasingly transparent as she tried to relay messages from my brother and Emma. Just when I thought I was finding my footing, my mother orchestrated her first attempt at forced reconciliation. She called to say she was visiting Indianapolis for a charity event and wanted to meet for coffee. I agreed, foolishly thinking she might finally understand my position. Instead, I arrived at the coffee shop to find not just my mother, but also my brother and Emma waiting at a table. They had flown in specifically for this ambush, apparently believing that a public setting would force me to hear them out. Emma was wearing the engagement ring she had never returned, which felt like a deliberate provocation. I didn't sit down. I didn't give them the chance to launch into whatever rehearsed speeches they had prepared. I simply turned and walked out, ignoring my mother's calls and my brother's attempt to follow me. Later that evening, my phone was flooded with messages about how I was being unreasonable and needed to move forward. The irony of them ambushing me while accusing me of being unreasonable wasn't lost on me. I blocked my brother's number that night and told my mother that any future surprise visits would result in the same treatment. The one positive development in all this has been meeting Catherine, 42F, another professor in the department. She specializes in a research area complementary to mine, and we've started collaborating on a new project. There's something refreshing about working with someone who knows nothing of my past drama. Catherine is divorced and seems to understand the need for space and new beginnings. We often share coffee in the department lounge, discussing research and gradually sharing pieces of our lives. She's never pushed for details about Milwaukee, and I appreciate that more than she knows. Last week, my sister called to tell me that Emma and my brother have moved in together into a new apartment near our parents. She seemed surprised when I didn't react to this information. What did she expect? That I would suddenly care about their living arrangements? That the formalization of their betrayal would somehow change how I feel? I'm building something new here. My research is progressing well. I've started mentoring 3 promising graduate students, and for the first time in months, I feel like I'm moving forward instead of just running away. Catherine has been a significant part of that progress, though I'm careful not to rush into anything. The department chair mentioned yesterday that they're considering me for a leadership role in a new research initiative. It would mean more responsibility, but also more opportunities to shape the direction of our research programs. 6 months ago, I was too focused on survival to think about career advancement. Now, I'm actually excited about the possibilities. My mother still tries to reach out occasionally, but her messages have taken on a different tone. She talks about how family should stick together and how my absence is tearing the family apart. I can't help but notice how she never acknowledges that it was their actions, not mine, that caused this rift. I'll write more when there's something significant to share. For now, I'm focused on building this new chapter of my life. It's not the life I had planned, but maybe it's the life I needed to find. Update 2. It's been 3 months since my last update, and I need to share what happened. Just when I thought my life was finally settling into a peaceful routine, my family found another way to try to force their version of reconciliation. The catalyst was a message from Sarah, my distant cousin. She reached out saying she was moving to Indianapolis and could use some help getting settled. I barely knew her. We'd only met at a few family gatherings over the years, but I felt guilty about completely ignoring family, so I agreed to help. That decision proved to be a mistake. When I arrived at her supposed new apartment complex, I found my brother's car in the parking lot. Before I could leave, my mother emerged from the building, followed by my father and brother. It was another ambush, this time using Sarah as bait. My mother rushed toward my car, waving and calling out like this was some kind of family reunion. I got out, but kept my distance. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My mother launched into her usual speech about healing and family unity, while my brother stood there with practiced tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling in what I'm sure he thought was a convincing display of remorse. "I know I messed up. I just want to fix things." My father chose that moment to step in with his particular brand of condescension. "Son, you're holding on to this grudge, and it's tearing the family apart. Be the bigger man." Something in me snapped. Years of their manipulation, their dismissal of my feelings, their constant pressure to forgive the unforgivable, it all came to a head. When my father put his hand on my shoulder, I reacted without thinking. My fist connected with his jaw before I even realized what was happening. The aftermath was predictable. My mother burst into tears, my brother muttered something about me going too far, and my father stood there holding his jaw, looking shocked that his reasonable son could do such a thing. I walked back to my car without another word, ignoring their calls to come back and talk. That night, I blocked Sarah's number along with any remaining family contacts I hadn't already blocked. I sat in my apartment, processing what had happened. I wasn't proud of losing control, but I also didn't regret it. Sometimes a physical reaction is the only way to make people understand that you're serious about your boundaries. The next day, Catherine noticed something was off when we met for our usual morning coffee. When I told her what happened, she listened without judgment, then shared her own story of having to cut ties with toxic family members after her divorce. Her understanding meant more than any family loyalty my parents kept preaching about. Our relationship has grown stronger over these past months. We've been seeing each other regularly, though we're both taking things slow. She understands my trust issues, and I respect her need for independence. We're both damaged in our own ways, but maybe that's why we work so well together. The university recently approved our joint research proposal, which means we'll be working closely together for the next few years. It's refreshing to have a relationship built on mutual respect and shared interests, rather than family obligations or misplaced loyalty. I'm done giving my family chances to hurt me again. They've shown repeatedly that they don't respect my feelings or my boundaries. They're more concerned with maintaining their image of a happy family than acknowledging the pain they've caused. Some bridges need to be burned, not repaired. I'm building a new life here, with people who respect me and understand that trust, once broken, isn't easily fixed. Catherine and I are planning to present our research at a conference in Chicago next month. It's strange to think that I'll be so close to Milwaukee but feel no desire to visit. I'll update again if anything significant changes, but for now, I'm focused on moving forward. The family I was born into may have failed me, but I'm learning that family is something you can choose to build with people who actually care about your well-being. Update 3. It's been a year since my last update, and I'm finally ready to share how everything turned out. At 45, I never expected to start my life over completely, but sometimes the best chapters come after what you thought was the end. The biggest news is that Catherine and I got engaged last month. No grand gestures or elaborate proposals, just a quiet evening in our favorite park near campus. After what happened with Emma, I was hesitant about marriage, but Catherine helped me understand that not every relationship is built on deception. We're planning a small ceremony, just close friends and colleagues. My academic life has flourished here. Our joint research program has gained significant recognition, and we've secured major funding for the next 5 years. The irony isn't lost on me that my professional life took off after everything fell apart personally. Catherine and I make a strong team, both in research and in life. The most unexpected news came through my sister last week. She sent an email saying our parents have separated. My father is living in a motel on the outskirts of Milwaukee, while my mother keeps up appearances in the family home. She also mentioned that my brother and Emma's marriage is struggling apparently, financial problems and trust issues are tearing them apart. Emma lost her academic position, and my brother's business isn't doing well. I felt nothing when I read this news. No satisfaction, no anger, just a profound sense of distance from it all. These people who once constituted my entire world now feel like characters in a story I read long ago. Catherine noticed my contemplative mood and simply held my hand, understanding without words that sometimes silence is the best response. We're expecting our first child, a boy. Every time I think about becoming a father, I'm filled with a mix of joy and determination. I'm committed to giving him something I never truly had, unconditional love and unwavering support. Catherine and I talk often about how we want to raise him, building on our shared experiences of what family should and shouldn't be. Last month, my mother sent another letter trying to reconnect. She wrote about how the family was falling apart and needed me to help put it back together. The old me might have felt guilty, might have been tempted to try one more time. Instead, I put the letter through the shredder without finishing it. Some chapters need to stay closed. I took steps to make the separation more permanent. I legally changed my last name. It was a decision that felt both dramatic and necessary. Catherine understood completely, and she's planning to take my new name when we marry. We're creating our own legacy, one that's built on trust and mutual respect rather than obligation and manipulation. The academic community here has become my new family. We host regular dinner parties with colleagues, celebrate achievements together, and support each other through challenges. It's a different kind of family, one chosen through shared values and genuine connections rather than blood ties. Sometimes I wonder if my brother and Emma ever truly regret what they did, or if my parents understand how their actions enabled the destruction of our family. But these thoughts come less frequently now. My focus is on the future, our future. Catherine and I are house hunting, preparing for both the baby and our new life together. The scars from what happened will always be part of my story, but they no longer define me. I've learned that family isn't about shared DNA, it's about the people who stand by you, who respect your boundaries, and who love you without conditions or manipulations. To anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, it's never too late to start over. Cutting ties with toxic family members isn't failure, sometimes it's the healthiest choice you can make. Real family supports you, respects you, and helps you grow. If your blood relatives can't do that, it's okay to build a family of your own choosing. I don't plan to update again. This chapter of my life, the betrayal, the pain, the rebuilding, is complete. What lies ahead is a new story, one I'm writing on my own terms, with people who truly deserve to be part of it.